And within less than 24 hours, they'd already identified 100 people he'd had contact with and put them on quarantine. That has not happened in Liberia in the entire duration of the epidemic. They don't have the public health infrastructure to do that. So coming in and trying to apply a Western model, I mean, it's nice that they have all these tent cities with all this, appropriate flow and all these personnel with all their personal protective equipment and everything. But the fact is, they can't get enough people to run them. They can't get enough of them built to keep up with the curve of increasing new cases. And ultimately, they're not doing anything to curb the problem, which is the fact that people are having Ebola in their homes and being taken care of by 10 or 15 family members or wearing no protective gear. And only when they get really sick are they being brought to the Ebola treatment center. So they may be able to treat a few people, but those that they're treating are those who are coming in the last minute who are more likely to die anyway. And those who could be saved, those who have early symptoms of Ebola, if they're treated early, are more likely to be saved. If you look at this country, 8 out of 9 people have lived who've had Ebola. Only 1 died. And the reason the 1 guy died is because treatment was started late. That was because Thomas Duncan got sent home for 4 days with antibiotics before they finally figured out he had Ebola. Everyone else was started treatment early and they were saved. So the Ebola treatment units in Liberia are never going to attack the problem. They're just going to maybe treat a few people who are still mostly going to die. But you need to go into the communities where it's starting. You need to be able to isolate people. You need to be able to quarantine people. You need to get the treatment early on. So my idea is, instead of wasting tens of thousands of dollars buying new Land Cruisers so that expatriate staff can ride around comfortably on the paved street of Monrovia, they should be enlisting the aid of the Liberians themselves. So the first problem is they need a place to treat and isolate people when they're suspected of having Ebola. So there's schools in every community, and these schools are closed down because the government has closed down all education systems because they don't want large groups of people getting together. So open up these schools as community treatment centers. And then you enlist the help of those people who've already had Ebola and survived, because now they are resistant to Ebola. And they can come and take care of suspected cases without the risk of getting contaminated again. So you've already got a group of people who are pretty risk-free if they're recruited, and they could be then, instead of recruiting expat staff, you're actually using local people and keeping the money in the economic system. And start them on treatment early. And the early treatment is very simple. Most people die of dehydration. So start giving them fluids. As soon as anyone is suspected of anything, you've got a fever, you've got a headache, you've got muscle aches, come in, we'll put you there, we'll get you tested, and start giving you a lot of fluids, and start replacing your electrolytes. And that's, what has been shown to have the greatest benefit in treating Ebola. And the second problem is lack of ability to test. When I was there was only 2 labs in the whole country that were testing for Ebola. And they could do about 50 tests a day. Well, you're having hundreds of people who needed to be tested every day for Ebola. So put the money, these, how many billions of dollars now is the U.S. talking about going over there? How about just getting a few lab equipment and training some people to be able to test for Ebola, and so you can actually determine if they have it or not, and start them on treatment. So in these community health centers, I would say have a central lab, put people in taxis. You don't need to buy big Land Cruisers to get people around town. There's plenty of taxis available. It costs like $2 to get around town, and send them out morning and evening to these community treatment centers so they can test every single patient there for Ebola, because those who have it need to be tested regularly to see if they're getting over it, and those who are just come in need to be tested to see if they actually need to be continue to be treated. And the last problem is what to do about the dead bodies. Again, this is the highest risk of contamination. Currently, well, at least when I was there, it took 3 to 5 days by the time we as a hospital called the Ministry of Health before a dead body was picked up. And that's just ridiculous. The city is not that big. But they took, they had to do it in what they considered an appropriate way, which to them meant 2 Toyota Hilux pickup trucks, a Toyota Land Cruiser, a large diesel flatbed truck, and 12 people to pick up 1 body. Well, my idea is there's all these little Peugeot pickup trucks beat up. They're about 30 years old, and they usually carry beer and soda around town to the different stores. Hire these guys, give them the protective suits, have 3 of them on a team, all 3 of them wearing their suits. One guy has a backpack with a spray thing on that has diluted Clorox bleach in it. The other 2 guys have a body bag. And whenever the call goes in saying, we've got a body, you've got people stationed all over the city in these little trucks, and send them in. And the first person to get the body, if they bring it in within 3 hours, they get a certain amount of money. If it's 3 to 6 hours, they get less, they get less, they get less. So there's motivation for these guys to pick up the bodies quick. And once they put the body in the bag, spray everything down with bleach. It kills Ebola in like 10 seconds. And then spray them down, dump it on you if you have to, dump it over the body, throw it in there, and then take it off. And the other problem they were having is they only had 2 crematoriums in the whole city. So they're saying, we can't keep up with the dead bodies. We can't burn them, we have nowhere to bury them, the water table's too high. And I started thinking, how hard is it to burn a body? In India, part of their culture, they burn all the bodies. They just pile wood against it and throw gasoline over it and set it on fire. How hard can it be to burn a body? They just need to figure out a way, build some brick ovens, throw in some charcoal, throw in some kerosene, and burn the bodies. So all these things are things that can be done really with local resources and would have a much more likely effect of actually stemming the tide, because you'd have the community involved. They'd be the ones sending, the community leaders are the only ones that people still trust there, have them come in and send the people to the community care center. The families who've been exposed, they'll then be self-quarantined by the community leaders. You could actually put an end to it, and you could have put an end to it a long time ago with literally a fraction of the money that has already been wasted in fighting Ebola. But ultimately, the problem again is human resources. People who can go over, who can help implement these things. We need an army of people who are unafraid and willing to sacrifice for the common good. An example of how it can be done was in Nigeria. There was a Liberian official who flew to Nigeria for a meeting, even though he was already starting to be sick and people suspected he might have Ebola. But he went anyway. And when he did finally get really sick, he went to a Nigerian hospital. And this is how usually things go from bad to worse, because if you don't recognize it, then so many people get contaminated. But fortunately, there was a doctor, Dr. Stella Adadivo. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. But she immediately said, I bet you that this is suspicious for Ebola. And she immediately isolated this guy, put him in quarantine in the hospital, and as they were trying to treat him, he was trying to leave, he was pulling out his IVs, and they forcefully kept him there, facing an international crisis. This was a Liberian government official, but they said, no, we have to keep this person here. And they finally tested him, and he turned out to have Ebola. And 8 of the staff members who took care of him also got Ebola, including Dr. Adadivo. And she ended up dying. But Ebola was contained. Those 8 people were the only people that were infected by Ebola. They were isolated, treated appropriately, and no one else was contaminated, and Nigeria is currently free of Ebola. Because this doctor was willing to put her life on the line and sacrifice her life, she saved her entire country. If only that had happened in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. We should not let ourselves be paralyzed by fear. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said in his 1933 inaugural address, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. The Muslim holy book, the Quran, also talks about fear. There's one phrase that is repeated many times. La khawfun alaihim wa lahu yazanun. There's no fear over them, nor will they grieve. As one example, Quran 3, 169 to 170 says, those who are killed in the cause, happy with God, with what God has granted them from His grace, they rejoice in those who have yet to follow after them. There is no fear upon them, nor do they grieve. We are not meant to be prisoner of our fear. The large nonviolent civil disobedience movements of the 20th century, led by Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., among others, also relied on facing down fear with true courage, as the marchers, boycotters, bus riders, those who were on sit-ins, were verbally abused, physically abused, tortured, and sometimes killed. But in the end, they won what Dr. King called the double victory. Somehow, we must be able to stand up against our most bitter opponents and say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. But be assured that we'll wear you down by our capacity to suffer, and one day we will win our freedom. We will not only win freedom for ourselves, we will appeal to your heart and conscience that we will win you in the process, and our victory will be a double victory. Gandhi, when he was asked how he was able to face down and kick the mighty British Empire out of India, replied that he used to meditate for 2 hours every day on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where an outline for nonviolent resistance was set forth. But in the end, all three, Jesus, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr., died premature, violent deaths to help rid the world of great evils. They were willing to sacrifice their lives for the common good of humanity. And ultimately, whether or not Jesus' supposed followers actually put it into practice today, Jesus laid down that practical theory of self-sacrifice to help fight evil, human or otherwise. In his last words before sacrificing his own life, he gave final instructions. He said, "No one has greater love than this, that one lays down his life for his friends." So it's World Peace Day, and there's two ways of ensuring peace. There's the forceful way, the way that we have tried in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places, which has proved to be not very successful. And there's the self-sacrificial way of Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr., of Jesus, which is really the only way of ensuring peace and fighting evil. And so there's no peace in Liberia right now, because Ebola is there and it needs to be fought. So we need to find people who are willing to give up their lives, to sacrifice them if necessary for the common good of humanity. So let's help save our West African brothers and sisters by showing them the greatest love there is. In the end, maybe we'll save ourselves as well. So I know that's probably not what you expected to hear today, but I believe it's the truth. At this point, though, I would like to open up if there's anyone who has any questions about anything to do with the Ebola, the crisis, anything that was talked about today, whatever it is. I'm happy to try and answer, because sometimes there's so much that I could say. I find it's better to just leave it open to questions if anyone has any.
I'd like to just thank you for being here today, if that's okay.
Thank you.
It's an honor to have you here today. This cause is, what you're doing is, I'm sure God's smiling down upon you.
Yes. I have to say that, yeah, embittered, possibly, frustrated, definitely, when you see, when you see that people's lives are often sacrificed for political ends, is the way I see it often. It's not just it's the local governments and their corruption and everything too, all working together to really, and just the fact that it was neglected for so long. I mean, people have known, Doctors Without Borders have been saying since March that this is a serious problem, and yet no one has really done anything. And if it really would have been nipped in the bud, it really could have been eradicated within a few months, like all the other epidemics were. And the reason the other epidemics only lasted a few months is because they were in villages where they still had tribal leaders who still had authority, and they put self-imposed quarantines, and so within 1 to 2 months, it was eliminated. Because the way to treat a disease like this is a public health measure. It's isolation and quarantine. Even if you don't treat them at all, you can get rid of it in no time at all. Whereas the international effort seems to be on treating Ebola, which is not preventing new cases really at all. Because by the time they come to the treatment center, they've already exposed all of their family really frustrating to me that, really nothing is being done. And the fact that all these organizations are there, so many millions and hundreds of millions of dollars have been sent, and yet no one is even really coordinating or leading an effort. There's still no protocol of treatment that is being, a standard protocol of treatment, standard protocol of isolation, of quarantine. There's no real standards at all. There's no leadership. Everyone's just kind of haphazardly doing what they wish. So yeah, I guess I can say I'm a little embittered. Because these are people who I really have grown close to, and I know that these staff members of this hospital are still at risk, and some of my friends may die of this. I escaped, but some of my friends may not. So I'm kind of embittered, I would say, yeah.
I heard on the radio you were discussing not being able to, you were purchasing a suit, I believe, and the person didn't want to have contact with you after all you've done?
Yeah, when I first arrived, I was self-quarantining myself. No one actually checked on me in the airport or anything, but I knew what I needed to do. So I was checking my temperature, I had no symptoms. And I went to buy a suit at the men's warehouse, and as I was checking out and paying for it, it was going to be altered, so I had to come and pick it up later. But as I was checking out, the man looked outside and said, "Hey, is that your orange van again?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, do you surf?" I said, "Yeah." So we started talking, and then as I was about to leave, I said, "Don't tell anyone." And I wasn't even thinking about the terms of Ebola. I was just thinking about, hey, this is a secret spot that I hope stays virgin. But in Liberia, there's this great surf spot in Robertsport. Talked about it. And then I left. Well, I came back a week later to pick up my suit, and I was a little bit early, about 10 minutes early, and I pulled right up there in the orange van again. So I saw the guy opening the door, and I thought, oh, great, he recognized me. He's going to let me in early and get my suit. As I started to go up to the door, though, he puts out his hand and says, "Stop. Don't come any closer. I'm afraid of you. You've been to that place. I'll get you your suit, but don't come any nearer. You can't come in." I thought, whoa. And I felt maybe what it's like to be a leper or an HIV patient in the early 80s, or a minority in many parts of the world. I was not wanted, and yet it was completely unfounded. Because even if you have Ebola, until you have symptoms, you're not contagious. You can't pass it on to anyone. And I certainly was not contagious. And at that point, I already passed anyway the 21 days, which is how long between your last contact, the incubation period, from 2 to 21 days. After you've had contact with someone with Ebola, if you haven't had it in 21 days, you're not going to have it. So, any other questions? Yes?
So, when you were talking about how fear was like one of the causes, wouldn't it be a mixture of fear and ignorance to the disease, not understanding it?
Certainly, ignorance and fear go very often hand in hand. We often fear what we don't know. That's why going to a foreign country is often a fear-provoking experience, because everything is unfamiliar. We're ignorant of the local customs. We're ignorant of the language. We're ignorant of the culture. We're ignorant, and we don't know. So yeah, that idea of ignorance and fear often do go very hand in hand. And yet, in this day and age, and there's so much information out there on Ebola, there's really no excuse for ignorance at this point. And yet fear somehow still reigns. So I don't know if it's just people are refusing to be properly educated and thus staying afraid, or if they are just not taking the time to get really informed. I don't know. But yes, those two definitely go hand in hand. Yes?
James, I did have a question again. As part of the organizing committee, my wife, bringing you over. Thank you for being here. It takes a lot of courage, especially at a secular university, to mention the word God and cite the Bible and stuff. So I appreciate you having that courage of speaking the truth of how you feel. My question is related to both being a doctor and inherently having this sort of selfless belief that I need to help. That's why I went into this profession. And at the same time, you have the religious calling of which you feel that you're doing something because Jesus said so, or because it is the right thing to do. for the students that are here at this university, what message could you give them about helping without necessarily feeling that it is a religious obligation to help? That this is not...
Well, I think that, yeah, to me, I don't know that it's necessarily a religious obligation either. To me, it just makes sense. To me, it's the kind of life that I enjoy, the things that I've gained. I think anytime you gain anything in life, you're giving something up. I mean, you work hard to get an education, you give up certain things. You give up certain things to get certain jobs or to move up the ladder, whatever. You're always sacrificing something to get what you want. So it kind of just depends on what you want. And sacrificing is always the way to get there. Like I mentioned, this country has always been based upon people willing to give their lives for it, for what they believe in, which is this country has nothing to do with religion at all. So to me, it just is, practically, like I mentioned, it makes sense that ultimately, if you become so self-centered that you only think about yourself, and you forget thinking as a society and for the good of society and humanity as a whole, ultimately everyone loses and everyone self-destructs. That's what's happened to empires throughout history. All you gotta do is look at history of the Roman Empire and all other empires. They implode when they become completely self-absorbed and self-centered. So I don't think it's necessarily religious as it is just a practical reality of the way things work. For me, it happens to be confirmed in what I read in the teachings of Jesus, which unfortunately I do not see played out in Christianity pretty much for the last 1,700 years. But the early Christians did, and they were changing the world. And then they stopped dying for what they believed in and started killing other people who didn't believe like they did, and that's when I think things changed.
A quick follow-up on that is, we hear a lot of people saying, why are we as Americans always going abroad when down the block we have issues? What message would you bring to those folks?
I've been over in Chad, in Africa, since January 2004, and I can guarantee you that not a single person in America has died because I haven't been there. But every time I leave Africa, there's probably people who are dying because I'm not there. So every day, while I am watching people die every day, I'm also saving people's lives every day. Whereas here, for example, I worked some urgent care shifts while my wife was pregnant. We actually have 3 kids now. I just had a 3rd child. I was working some urgent care shifts. At the end of one of these shifts, I looked at my fellow colleague and I said, you know, if every single person came and saw me today and never sought medical care for their problem, they would be fine. No one's dying because I'm not working here as a physician. So I think, yeah, there are problems here for sure. But compared to the problems over there, I mean, when you compare 50 doctors for an entire country of 5 million people, you know how many doctors are at Loma University? Probably 600, 800, just in that one hospital. You can't compare it. Yes?
I'm just curious about you being African and being there. What do you see being an actual establishment there for a situation like this? You're talking about Ebola right now. I'm sure there's a lot of situations that come out. So what work is being done to actually address some of the root cause issues rather than just responding to the latest,
I wish I could say that I've seen a lot being done, but unfortunately there isn't, because there's no money in it. You know, most NGOs and humanitarian organizations go where the money is, so whatever makes the media. Like for example, in Eastern Chad, where we're working to establish a new hospital, there's one hospital for a population of 1.6 million, which includes all the refugees from Darfur who are still there. No one hears about them today because they're no longer in the media since the Haiti crisis happened, and then now Ebola, and there's always new crises that get media attention, and then that's what people give their money to. So the humanitarian aid organizations follow the money around the globe from crisis to crisis. But nothing has changed there in Eastern Chad for the refugees. They're still there, they still have no one taking care of the medical needs, no one taking care of the basic needs, no education, no nothing. I wish I could say things were different. But being on the ground, I see how easy it is for an organization to come to a conference in the capital city in an air-conditioned conference room in a big hotel and give a report with slides and make it look like things are happening. When you're out in the bush, nothing's happening. I wish I could be the bearer of good news, but that's what I've seen. I'm not saying they don't do any good, I'm just saying that's the reality that I've seen. It really is jumping from crisis to crisis rather than thinking about what is a long-term solution for this problem. For example, another example, in 2012, had the biggest rain that has happened in Chad since anyone can remember. All the old people in the village are like, I don't remember, maybe the rain of 1920 or something like this. The biggest rain ever. And so people are growing stuff like crazy and everything just, and someone about that time emailed me and said, so what's happening with the famine crisis in Chad? I said, famine? This is the best people we've been eating in a long time. But you know, you're going to find skinny kids somewhere who maybe are malnourished from having untreated malaria or worms or something. You can take pictures of them, and you can go to a desert place where things look pretty poor and bad, and you can show all the pictures you want and raise money for famine relief if you want to. Sorry, go ahead. I get nervous now.
I have a question. Do you think U.S. hospitals are overdoing it in preparation for more potential Ebola cases, or is this a good drill for the next
It's
clinic?
no. I mean, if anything, they should be screening people for the flu, because 36,000 people died of the flu last year, and so far one person has died of Ebola in this country. So it's certainly overkill, and especially since it's so easy to trace. I mean, the flu can be transmitted so easily. It's probably in this room, and someone's got the flu. Yeah. Whereas Ebola is coming from West Africa, so anyone who gets on a plane leaving West Africa should go into an international database, and everyone should be alerted. And once they enter this country, they should be screened and isolated, tested, quarantined, whatever. And there's no need for them to be going to any random hospital. And the likelihood of them showing up at a random hospital is pretty much almost non-existent. Yes.
You had mentioned some different ideas as far as, no, I don't want to
No, it's being recorded. Your voice is not.
You had mentioned some different ideas about just ways to combat different things out there. I'm curious, what have you been able to do, or are you able to do any of those things? Maybe just within the immediate area. I know the process to more global with the government is a lot more difficult. But as far as where you're at, have you been able to work on those things, or make progress, or work with other people to be able to bring those things to where you're at?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I was there for 6 weeks, and all these ideas kind of developed over that period. And talking with, especially with another doctor at the ELWA hospital, who actually was one of the first people treating Ebola patients there, and we kind of had similar ideas. And towards the end, I did speak with the representative from the Ministry of Health about the idea, and he said that they already had that kind of as an idea. And later on, I looked up, and the World Health Organization has already actually detailed these community care centers pretty similar to what I thought, at least the general idea. But then I had to leave. And right now, I've been working with Loma Linda University, and their public health department is very interested in trying out this in the local neighborhood just around the hospital where I was at, as kind of a pilot model. So they're working on doing that. And again, it's the problem of human resources. And I can sound like a hypocrite because I really would like to go back, but I'm saying, well, I can't have circumstances. So yeah, I really feel kind of torn, because I really think if I went back, I could have a chance of doing this. Because I think it just takes someone being on the ground, who's lived in Africa, go out and meet with the community leaders and just get it rolling. But we're still, again, looking for those human resources who can do that. And I have, unfortunately, other obligations with my family and with my work in the Republic of Chad that I'm not able to go back this time. By the time I'm able to go back, I'm hoping it will be over. But yeah, it needs to be done. So if you know anyone, I mean, we're looking for people who can spearhead a project like this because we want to do a pilot because we're pretty sure it can work. And like I said, it's all on paper already, so getting the authorization from the government will be easy because WHO is pretty much the same thing. All we need is someone on the ground who can do it, human resources.
You should talk to the world languages and everybody who's taking French can get some units.
Well, Liberia is actually English speaking, of a sort. So, yeah, there's no language excuses in Liberia.
Is there, so there's a need for people without a medical background over there?
For me, it's pretty much, I mean, the way these have been handled in the past have been by village chiefs, people out in the bush who probably have no formal education whatsoever. I mean, it's really a simple problem of public health isolation quarantine. You don't really need to be a healthcare professional to do it. There's minimal training. All really is take someone who's good at talking to people and coordinating things and organizing and things like that. Really, to be honest, it doesn't take a doctor.
I think at this point we just want to thank James again. Let's give him a hand applaud. Make sure that everybody fills out the survey, drop it off